The night was colder than I remembered. The kind of cold that slips under your skin, curling around your bones and whispering that you're not alone. I had wandered into the forest again, drawn by the way the fog seemed to bend the pale moonlight into shapes I almost recognized. Every step on the damp leaves echoed softly, a rhythmic beat that matched my racing heart. In the distance, a faint hum lingered, barely there, yet insistently persistent, like someone called my name just beyond hearing. The trees swayed without wind, shadows stretching longer than they should, and I swore I saw a movement in the corner of my eye. A single flickering lantern, abandoned on a trail, cast light that shivered across the trunks like frozen breath. That's when I saw it. The path was narrow, lined with tall pines that bent toward each other like old friends whispering secrets. A thin fog clung to the roots, curling around the trunks like smoke from a dying fire. The air smelled damp, earthy, sharp, with something faintly sweet underneath. I thought I was alone, but the forest seemed aware. Every step pressed into the soft moss made it sigh, a quiet exhale that felt too deliberate. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a wind, a faint murmur weaving through the branches. But it wasn't wind. It was a voice, soft, almost lost in the rustle, saying my name. I froze. The fog thickened, clinging to my skin. A chill slid down my spine, not from cold, but from the sense that the trees themselves were bending closer to listen. Every heartbeat sounded too loud, echoing in my ears like a drum in a hollow cave. Shapes moved just beyond my vision, pale figures glimmering between trunks. They weren't running, just hovering, dissolving in the mist before I could focus. When I blinked, they were gone, replaced by a shadow that felt heavier than the night itself. The murmur returned, closer now. It pressed against my chest, urging me forward. Each step crunched softly, but the forest didn't respond. No birds, no scurrying animals. Just a silence that wrapped around me tighter than the fog. I tried to call out. My voice caught in my throat. It sounded small, weak, swallowed immediately by the thick, damp air. Even the breeze seemed paused, as if waiting for me to move, to speak, to breathe differently. Branches scraped my arms as I pressed onward. The bark was rough, damp, and smelled faintly of resin and rot. Every snap underfoot seemed magnified, as though the forest itself counted my steps. I felt eyes on me, always on me, though I saw nothing. A sudden stillness fell. The fog hung like a curtain, thick and suffocating. No whisper now, only the pulsing of my own heartbeat. The pines swayed slightly, but silently, each movement deliberate, measured, watching. Then a glimpse, a pale figure between two trunks, barely visible. It tilted its head at me. No face, just a soft glow where skin should have been. I blinked. It vanished. I began to run, though my legs felt heavy, tethered to the earth by some invisible thread. Each breath was loud in my ears, ragged, uneven. The fog wrapped around me, hiding the path, the trees, the ground beneath my feet. Even as I fled, I felt it, that quiet presence following, just beyond the mist, watching, waiting. And when I reached the edge of the forest, the world felt hollow. The trees behind me stood still, motionless. The fog had lifted slightly, but the silence remained, a silence that lingered on my skin, under my fingernails, in the hollow of my chest. I didn't look back. I couldn't, but I could still feel the forest, and I knew it would not forget me. The night had deepened. Mist hovered low over the forest floor, curling around roots and fallen branches. The air smelled faintly of wet pine and smoke that wasn't there. I walked slowly, each step sinking slightly into the damp earth. My breath rose in soft clouds, visible in the pale light of the moon. Everything was quiet, yet it wasn't empty. Then I saw it, a light flickering far ahead. Small, steady, almost hesitant. No figure held it. No torch, no hand. Just a lantern, waiting. I blinked. When I looked away, it shifted, a gentle sway, like it was breathing, moving ever so slightly on its own. The fog wrapped around it, softening the edges, making the glow more alive. I felt my heart tighten. Curiosity tugged me forward, but the cold in my chest whispered caution. The air grew thicker as I approached. It pressed against my skin, clinging to my clothes, to my hair, to my lungs. Closer now. A faint hum drifted from it, low, melodic, almost conversational. It wasn't words I could understand, just a tone that felt familiar, though I had never heard it before. It wrapped around me, gentle but insistent, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I reached out, expecting warmth. There was none. The lantern was heavier than air, weightless yet grounding, a paradox I could feel pressing into my hands without touching it. Something moved beside me. A presence stepped aside to let me pass. No shadow, no shape, just an absence, a hollow where space felt shifted. I noticed it only in the silence after the hum paused. The forest leaned closer. Branches curled above me, brushing against my shoulders like tentative fingers. I could smell damp moss, faintly metallic, as if the earth had been waiting for me to notice. The light wavered, teasing, inviting, but never aggressive. I circled the lantern. Its glow reflected faintly in the mist, painting ghostly shapes on the trees. My own shadow stretched thin and long, trembling along the fog-draped ground. The hum returned, wrapping around me in soft spirals, twisting and folding like smoke through the night. I tried to step back. The air thickened further, resisting. The lantern remained still, patient, silent, waiting. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't pull my feet from the earth. Time shifted. The world narrowed to the lantern, to the fog, to the hum. I could feel something brushing past my arm, brushing against the back of my neck, always just outside my vision. No eyes, no face, just presence. I reached toward it again. The cold seeped into my bones. It was not a chill of wind or night. It was older, heavier, like the weight of the forest, waiting for me to notice its patient gaze. I stepped around it. The unseen presence moved with me, silently. It made no noise, but I knew it was there, guiding, holding, waiting. The fog shifted. The light flickered once more. I swallowed, my mouth dry, my ears buzzed with a hum that didn't fade. I realized I could leave, could step back into the ordinary world beyond the trees. But some part of me lingered, tethered to the lantern, to the quiet, to the careful patience that held the night in place. I walked on. The glow receded behind me. The hum faded into the distance, but its echo stayed in my chest. The forest seemed unchanged, yet I felt watched, still, like the lantern waited for me to return. Even now, I can feel it, hovering just beyond thought. Silent, patient, waiting. The forest thinned as the fog grew heavier. Branches scraped against each other, dragging long shadows across the ground. The scent of wet pine and earth lingered, thick and pressing. Ahead, a cabin appeared, with groaning softly in the wind. Its windows were dark, glass fog with condensation. I could feel the cold seep through the gaps in the boards, curling around my fingers before I even touched the door. Inside, the air smelled of damp timber and dust. The floorboards shivered under my weight. Every creak of the wood was loud in the quiet, like the house itself was breathing. A radio sat on a small table. Static hummed from it, low and insistent. Then faint whispers emerged, curling through the crackle. I couldn't make out words, only tones. Urgent, delicate, waiting. I pressed closer. The fog outside pressed too, leaning against the windows like pale hands. Condensation dripped slowly, and in its streaks, I thought I saw faces. Not just shapes, but features. Eyes wide, mouths just opening, closing. The whispers continued, almost conversational. They wound around my chest, tugging at something deep, something unnameable. I reached for the radio, but the static shifted, resisting my touch. It felt alive. The cabin seemed smaller now, walls leaning inward, shadows pulled in corners, waiting. I realized I wasn't moving alone. A presence lingered in the room, silent but unmistakable. Every breath I took echoed against the rough wood. The fog pressed harder, muffling the world beyond the glass. The air smelled faintly of iron and wet wool. I could feel it, brushing past my arm, close enough to make my hair lift, yet unseen. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, but the whispers knew my thoughts before I spoke them. They paused when I paused, shifted when I shifted. The static grew louder, filling the room, pressing against my chest. A faint draft made the candle flicker. Its pale light painted long, tremulous shadows on the walls. Faces emerged in the condensation again, fleeting, distorted. Eyes that followed me. Mouths that moved when I did not. The presence leaned closer. Not a shadow, not a shape. Something older, slower, waiting. I felt its attention like a weight on my skin, a brush against my spine. I sat on the edge of the bed. The radio hummed steadily. The whispers circled my head, soft, patient. I could feel my own heartbeat, loud, uneven, alive. Night fell fully. The fog thickened, sealing me inside the cabin. Every window framed shifting shapes that seemed to breathe in rhythm with me. I wasn't alone, and I knew it had been here long before I arrived. The static grew softer, almost tender. The whispering, too, fading to a lull. I didn't move, didn't speak. The presence lingered, waiting, and somewhere in the quiet, I realized the cabin itself listened, as though the walls remembered every step I had taken, every heartbeat, every breath. The night waited with me, silent, patient, watching. The fog hugged the riverbanks, curling around the old stone bridge like a pale hand. The air smelled damp, heavy, like earth soaked overnight. My shoes pressed against the slick stones, echoing softly with each step. I walked slowly, feeling the weight of the silence. The river beneath the arches was dark, restless, moving like it held secrets. Then I saw it, shadows shifting under the bridge, curling against the water. Not fish, not leaves, something deliberate, watching. I froze. The air pressed close, heavy, like breath held for too long. The reflection rippled, and something that wasn't water stared back at me. A pale face, faint and trembling, eyes too wide, too dark. It lingered just long enough for me to catch it, then vanished beneath the current, leaving only stillness. The fog thickened, brushing against my cheeks, damp and cold. Branches scraped against each other above, whispering in a rhythm I couldn't name. I felt the bridge shift beneath my weight, old wood settling with soft groans. Then a tug, light, quick, on my sleeve. I turned, heart stuttering, but no one was there, just the shadows, the fog, the river murmuring beneath me. I stepped forward, slowly, my fingers brushing the stone railing. It was slick with condensation, cold enough to sting. The air smelled of wet moss and river mud, heavy with something faintly metallic, something waiting. The shadows moved again, longer now, curling toward me from under the arches. I could hear the water pressing against the stones, restless, echoing faint murmurs I didn't recognize. Each step was loud, deliberate, breaking the quiet that seemed older than me. I stopped at the center of the bridge. The reflection returned. The pale face stared, unblinking, lips parting slightly as if to speak. I couldn't hear anything, only feel it, its attention pressing against my chest, steady, inescapable. The fog drifted closer, wrapping around my legs, brushing my hair. The shadows under the bridge shifted again, now following, not fleeing. The river moved strangely, folding light into darkness, showing shapes that weren't water, shapes that seemed to breathe. I swallowed. The tug on my sleeve came once more, gentler this time, closer, impossible to ignore. I shivered, my skin prickling, hair standing on end. I reached the far side of the bridge. The shadows didn't follow. The river returned to its normal, restless rhythm. But the reflection lingered in my mind, a face that waited beneath the surface, patient, unblinking. The fog thinned slightly. The night felt colder, sharper, more aware of me. The bridge groaned behind me, settling into the quiet. I walked on, but the weight of the presence stayed in my chest, its attention following, silent, patient, and unyielding. The night was quiet, heavier than usual. Streetlights flickered, pale halos spilling over wet pavement. The air smelled faintly of rain and asphalt, sharp and cold. I walked slowly, keys in my pocket, ears straining. Every step pressed into the concrete, soft, deliberate. Then I heard it. Footsteps, echoing mine. Light at first, distant, hesitant, then matching my pace. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. My breath quickened, short and uneven. I glanced back. Nothing. The street stretched ahead, dim and empty. Shadows leaned unnaturally against the walls. Each lamp buzzed softly, threatening to die. I started walking again, slower this time, careful, deliberate. The steps returned. Closer now. They pressed against my chest, louder in my bones and on the pavement. I couldn't escape the sound. I turned. Nothing. Just darkness curling between the street lamps. The wind carried a whisper, almost like breath, brushing against my neck. Every step forward felt like sinking. The world seemed to stretch, to tilt. Shadows clung to the corners of my eyes, longer, sharper than they should be. The air pressed in, damp, heavy, smelling faintly metallic. I tried to focus on the ground. The concrete glistened under the flickering light. The sound behind me pulsed with my heartbeat. Stop. Go. Stop. Go. I couldn't tell where I ended, and the steps began. The silence between the flickers of light was worse. Too loud, too complete. My chest throbbed with every heartbeat. Each footfall became a drum in the hollow of my skull. I glanced back again. Shadows moved, yes, but never fully formed. Always just at the edge of vision, melting into darkness when I tried to look straight at them. The air smelled of wet stone, of something faintly decayed, pressing at the edges of my senses. I walked faster. The steps behind me did the same. Pavement stretched ahead. Turns approached too slowly, too deliberately. My body moved, but it felt like nothing changed. A lamp above me flickered violently. The shadows twisted beneath it, stretched impossibly long. I blinked, and they were gone, or maybe closer. I couldn't tell anymore. By the last turn, I felt unmoored. The footsteps didn't stop, didn't pause. My own movement felt uncertain, as though I hadn't moved at all. The street, the lights, the shadows, they were all the same, and I was trapped in quiet, relentless rhythm behind me. I exhaled shallow, tremulous. The footsteps faded slightly, but the weight remained in my chest, a quiet pulse I could not shake. The street stretched on, empty, but I knew I was not alone. I had not been alone for some time, and maybe I never had been. The alley was narrow, choked with fog. The walls leaned inward, soaked with damp, smelling faintly of mildew and wet brick. Each step pressed against the pavement, uneven and slick. I felt it immediately, the weight of watching, not from above, not from the sides, but from everywhere, all at once. Then I saw them, eyes, hundreds of tiny glimmers catching the dim light. They blinked together, slow and deliberate, then vanished, and reappeared closer. The fog thickened, curling around my ankles, clinging to my clothes. Each blink made my heart stutter. Each movement made the alley seem smaller, tighter, more intent. The eyes followed, patient, silent, unblinking. A softness rose behind me. Not wind, not water. Something alive. It twisted around the fog, brushing against my ears, curling down my spine. I moved faster, shuffling over wet stone, but the alley stretched ahead like it had no end. The eyes multiplied with each glance, reflecting in puddles and cracks in the wet bricks. Every surface caught them, repeated them, until I couldn't tell where they truly were. The hiss followed, soft, patient, rising and falling with the fog. My skin prickled, goosebumps crawling along my arms. I swallowed. My breath rose in short, visible clouds that didn't seem to reach the end of the alley. I dared to glance back. Nothing. Only shadows curling around the corners, folding into themselves. But the feeling didn't leave. It pressed closer with each step, leaning, waiting. The alley's damp walls seemed alive, absorbing the dim light, reflecting movement I couldn't see. The fog stuck to my hair, my eyelashes cold and sharp. The eyes blinked again, closer now, almost at the edge of the alleyway. They waited, and I realized I couldn't outrun them. I stumbled toward the street at the alley's end. The fog thinned slightly, but the eyes lingered in the corners of my vision. Even as I reached the open air, the hiss followed. Even in daylight, their presence stayed behind my eyelids. I could feel it, watching still, in quiet rooms, in the brightness of morning. A shadow pressed against the back of my thoughts. The alley did not end with the street. It had followed me home. I exhaled. The chill didn't leave, and neither did the eyes. The house sagged under its own age, with groaning softly in the wind. Dust motes drifted in thin streams of pale light through cracks in the boarded windows. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old timber, heavy and waiting. I climbed the narrow stairs slowly. Each step creaked under my weight, echoing in the hollow silence. The attic door loomed above me, swollen with age, reluctant to open. Inside, a strange warmth pressed against my skin. Not heat, exactly. More like the house exhaling slowly, carefully. The dust floated in patterns that made my stomach twist. Whirls and streaks shaped like hands reaching up, stretching, grasping. I leaned closer, feeling the air hum against my cheeks. The warmth shifted, curling around my shoulders, almost comforting, almost alive. And then a sudden gust of cold brushed my neck. It was sharp, wet, carrying the scent of forgotten corners and rotting leaves. Breathing, soft, slow, deliberate. Not mine. I held still, tried to measure its rhythm, to tell if it was real. The attic seemed to pulse with it, pushing against the silence, pressing against the floorboards. Something moved just beyond the rafters. I couldn't see it, only a ripple of shadow, folding against the angled beams. My hands rose instinctively, brushing against the rough wood, splinters biting faintly. The dust stirred as if it noticed, drifting upward, trailing after the invisible presence. I stepped carefully forward. The floorboards groaned louder now, insisting on their age. Every movement made the attic shrink, tighten around me, like a living thing inhaling slowly. The warmth and the cold tangled together, chasing my senses, confusing my skin. I felt it watching, not from a corner, not from behind a beam, from everywhere. The rafters, the air, the dust swirling above my head, all pressing attention onto me. The breathing grew more distinct, closer. A pause, then another. I couldn't tell if it matched my own, or if mine had slowed to meet it. The attic seemed to tilt subtly, to lean in, and I felt my stomach lift slightly. Unsteady did I trace the rafters with my eyes. Shadows folding over each other. Dust spiraled down, catching the faint light, forming shapes that almost resembled figures. And every time I blinked, something moved where there should have been nothing. That I stepped back toward the stairs. The warmth remained, stubborn, like the house itself held its breath for me. The cold followed, curling down my spine, brushing against my neck, pressing my hair into my skin. The breathing lingered, soft, patient, almost curious. That I exhaled slowly, letting my chest relax, but not completely. The attic remained alive, pulsing faintly around me, its presence folding into every shadow, every drifting mote of dust. I didn't stay long, but I could feel it watching as I left. Even on the stairs, I felt its attention brush my back, a ghostly awareness, patient and deliberate. And when I stepped outside, into the open air, the warmth and the cold, the dust and the breathing, all seemed to fold into the memory of the house. The attic waited, and I knew it would not forget. The forest was quiet, deeper than usual, as night settled into the trees. The air smelled of damp leaves, pine resin, and something faintly sweet I couldn't name. Fog drifted low, curling around roots and trunks like slow-moving fingers that a pale light glimmered in the distance, soft, almost fragile, like the forest itself was breathing it into existence. No lantern, no fire, just a glow hovering between the trunks. That I walked toward it, careful, slow. The moss beneath my feet was cold and damp, pressing against my soles. The light shifted slightly as I moved, always just beyond direct reach. The fog thickened. Shapes began to form, thin, fleeting, like people walking silently. They moved gracefully, gliding over roots, their forms dissolving into mist. Each figure left a faint scent of damp soil and cold stone, lingering in the air. I blinked. They vanished. The light remained. Only whispers floated back from the distance, soft, undecipherable, patient. The forest seemed larger now, stretching farther, twisting around the glow. Branches brushed my shoulders, wet and sharp. The fog clung to my hair, curling down my neck, cold and insistent. I stepped forward. The pale light pulsed gently, like the forest's heartbeat. Every step made it flicker, subtle, teasing, drawing me deeper. Shadows shifted unnaturally, folding over themselves, stretching just beyond my vision. The whispers returned, curling around my chest, brushing my ears. Not words I could understand, just presence. Something patient, watching, guiding. I tried to reach the light. The figures formed again, barely visible, gliding silently between the trees. Their steps made no sound, but their movement pressed against me, subtle, unavoidable. The fog swirled around them, leaving trails in the air, like smoke painting shapes I could almost follow. Blinking, I found myself alone again. The forest returned to quiet. The figures gone. Only the pale light remained, hovering softly between the trunks. Patient. I exhaled slowly. The cold air brushed my face, damp and earthy. The light flickered one last time before fading into fog. Only the whispers lingered, faint echoes carried on the night wind. I stepped back from where it had been. The forest felt empty, still, yet not quiet. The presence lingered, subtle, patient, waiting just beyond perception. And I realized, even as I walked away, I could still feel it watching, folded into the fog, into the trees, into the soft, pale light that had vanished. The night was still, colder than I expected. Street lamps glowed faintly through a haze of fog, pale and trembling. The air smelled of wet earth, smoke, and something faintly metallic. On the doorstep, they were waiting. Letters. No return address. The envelopes were thick, heavy, almost clammy under my fingertips. The ink shimmered in the dim light, wet and dark, though the night was cold and dry. I opened the first one slowly. The handwriting trembled on the page, familiar and strange at once. Words that spoke of moments I thought were forgotten, of choices I couldn't remember making. Each line pressed against my chest like a finger, insistent, accusing. The second letter was worse. A detail I had buried long ago, a memory I had never shared, written in the same quivering hand. I traced the words, coldness creeping through my fingers and up my arms. The fog outside swirled around me, curling in, brushing my hair and face with damp insistence. I sat on the step, breathing shallow, listening. The letters hummed almost imperceptibly, like paper absorbing the night. Rustling of leaves outside carried into the still air, too soft a place, yet somehow accompanying the words on the page, and a third letter slipped from the envelope as I unfolded it. The ink glistened unnaturally, wet even after minutes in the cold. It named me, my choices, my mistakes, things I could not have imagined anyone else knowing. I shivered, letting the envelope fall onto my lap. That I looked up. The street was empty, silent, yet I felt eyes on me, not from behind the lamppost, not from the houses around, but a weight pressing unseen, patient. I gathered the letters one by one. Their tremble matched mine. I wondered, could I have written them? In some memory I had lost, a self I no longer recognized? The thought pressed against my mind, heavy and insistent. The fog thickened, curling around my shoulders, damp and cold. Shadows stretched along the curb, moving slowly, bending toward me. The letters vibrated faintly in my hands, as if the words themselves breathed. Pulsing with meaning I could not resist, I folded the envelopes carefully, holding them against my chest. The trembling hand on the pages echoed my own heartbeat. Outside, the street remained silent, the fog pressing close. The night waited, patient, breathing around me, wrapping its weight into the hollow between street lamp and doorstep. I exhaled slowly, letting the chill settle into my bones. The letters were still there, still wet, still alive in a way I could not explain. And I realized perhaps I had always known what they would say. Or perhaps some part of me had written them already, long ago, and simply forgotten that I stood, stepping back from the doorstep. The fog clung to me, damp and cold, whispering against my hair and face. The street stretched silent and empty before me, but the letter's presence lingered, folded into the night, into the breath of the darkness, into the weight pressing against my chest. Even as I walked away, I could feel it, the tremble of the ink, the whispers I could not hear, the shadows waiting, patient and inexorable. The forest was dense, silent except for the occasional sigh of wind through the pines. The ground was soft with moss and fallen leaves, cold and damp beneath my feet. Fog curled between the trunks, pale and slow, folding around roots and stones. Then I saw it. A door, standing alone in the forest. It stood old yet untouched by rain, untouched by sun. It was impossible, yet there it was, waiting that I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was a trick of light, a shadow cast strangely. But curiosity pressed, insistent, curling around my chest like cold hands. I stepped closer, brushing the mist aside, feeling the air thicken as I approached. The wood was smooth under my fingers, worn by some unknowable history, that I could smell faintly the scent of pine and dust, and something older beneath it, something almost metallic, almost like the pulse of the forest itself. I opened the door slowly. Inside, shadows shifted like liquid, curling and stretching independently of any source. They moved with no sound, no weight, yet I could feel them press against my skin, a whisper of cold brushing my neck, my arms, my chest. The forest outside seemed to pause. Even the fog stopped curling, frozen in the pale light around the door. The shadows inside trembled, coiling closer to the threshold, and I realized they weren't just shapes. They were aware, patient, waiting that I step back instinctively. The door closed on its own, heavy and deliberate. A soft exhale of air brushed past me, as if the forest had released its breath, leaving a hollow weight behind, a sense of something almost understood, but forever beyond reach. I traced the edges of the door with my hand, lingering on the cold wood. The forest seemed alive again, the fog folding around the trees, soft and slow. Yet the feeling remained, an echo, a pulse, a misunderstanding that pressed at my chest that I turned away, walking slowly through the moss, each footstep muffled and careful. The forest stretched endlessly, quiet, but the door lingered in my mind, its wood, its shadows, its impossible presence, as if some part of me had always known it would appear. The night settled around me, damp and heavy, and I realized the forest itself had kept its secret. I would walk on, but the door's presence stayed, folded into the memory of the fog, and in the spaces between shadow and light it waited. The world grew soft around me. Fog rolled in, thick and slow, swallowing the trees, the road, the sky. The air smelled damp, earthy, like the forest itself had exhaled. My footsteps sounded wrong, too loud. Each step echoed against invisible walls, pressing into the mist. Yet there were voices too, faint, curling around my ears, soft and almost familiar. Shapes began to form. They moved just beyond clear sight, pale outlines folding in and out of the fog. Some mimicked me, copying my posture, my pace. Then they vanished, dissolving into the damp air as quickly as they appeared. I slowed, listening. The fog held everything, sound, movement, even my own breath, suspended, waiting. It pressed close, curling around my neck and arms, damp and insistent. I felt the mist brush against my skin, almost like fingers guiding me forward. I stopped again. The shapes lingered, half-formed, restless. I blinked. They vanished. I could feel them behind me, waiting in the stillness, patient, silent. Each step I took felt uncertain. Was I walking forward, or was the fog carrying me, shifting beneath my feet? The whispers returned, soft, undecipherable, twisting through the mist like smoke. My heartbeat drummed in my chest, louder than the world around me. I reached out, touching the air. The fog swallowed my fingers, cold, damp, unyielding. The shapes reappeared for a heartbeat, just silhouettes, fleeting and precise, then melted away again. It felt deliberate, as though the fog itself were aware, watching, listening. The road ahead was invisible, the trees mere shadows and haze. Every sound, my breath, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of distant life, echoed strangely, unfamiliar, uncanny. I could not tell what belonged to me, and what belonged to the fog. I moved forward, careful, slow, following some instinct I didn't recognize. The shapes shifted with each step, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. The whispers curled around my chest, pressing, guiding, questioning. I wondered if I was walking at all, or if the mist had me already. Time stretched. The fog thickened further, pressing close, damp against my cheeks, chilling my shoulders. Every step was a negotiation, every breath a careful measure. I felt unseen eyes everywhere, watching, waiting, patient beyond understanding. Finally, the fog thinned slightly, just enough for faint outlines of trees to return. The whispers receded, but their echo lingered, soft, insistent, inside my chest. The shapes dissolved completely, leaving only the memory of movement, of being guided, carried, and observed. I exhaled, trembling. The mist clung to my clothes and hair, cold and damp, lingering long after it seemed to clear. I realized I would remember the feeling, the careful attention to the fog, long after I left it behind. The path ahead remained uncertain, but I could feel it. The quiet, patient weight of something listening, folded into the mist, folded into the space between my footsteps and my shadow. The subway tunnel was empty. Darkness pressed against the walls, wet and cold, smelling faintly of rust and damp concrete. The air felt heavy, thick with silence, waiting. Then I noticed it. Breaths behind me. Not mine. I walked slowly. Each step pressed against the damp floor, echoing faintly, but the breaths followed. Soft, uneven, deliberate, panting that matched my pace, but never overlapped exactly. I stopped. The panting stopped. I turned. Nothing. The tunnel stretched, pale light distant and muted, refracted through grimy vents. Shadows curled along the rails, leaning closer with each step I took. The air smelled colder now, sharp, metallic, carrying the faint hum of distant electricity. I moved again. The breaths returned, soft, insistent, brushing against my ears. They weren't loud, but each inhalation pressed inside my chest, echoing in my bones. I could feel behind me, patient, just beyond reach. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing, only shadow, dark and still, stretching along the curve of the tunnel. And still the echo of that breath lingered, filling the space, pressing the silence into my skin. The damp walls seemed alive, absorbing the light, the sound, even my own pulse. Every footstep was mirrored, every movement watched, unseen but deliberate. The faint hum of the train tracks beneath the tunnel seemed to vibrate with it, a subtle, unnerving resonance that curled around my spine. I walked faster. The breaths mirrored me exactly, soft, insistent, unyielding. The walls pressed closer, shadow leaning with me, and the tunnel seemed to stretch infinitely, folding upon itself in dark layers. I dared no longer look back. Nothing moved, but the sense of presence remained, pressing, patient. The echo of that breath etched itself into my mind, folding into every corner of the dark, every shadow I passed. I reached the faint glow of the exit. Air moved lighter there, colder, carrying the scent of night and wet asphalt. The breaths faded slowly, but the memory lingered, not in the body, but in the chest, in the throat, in the quiet between steps. I stepped out, the tunnel behind me stretching silent and empty, but the breath remained, patient, deliberate, folded into my memory as though it had always been part of the darkness, waiting to follow, waiting to be remembered. The room was empty, still and stale. Dust curled in faint streams of pale light through cracks in the boarded windows. The air smelled faintly of old wood and damp plaster. An old clock hung on the wall. No hands, yet it ticked, soft at first, almost polite, then louder, vibrating in my chest with each beat. I leaned closer. The tick pressed against my ribs, folding into my heartbeat until it was impossible to tell where my pulse ended and the clock began. Shadows moved along the walls. They grew and shrank, curling in ways that matched no light source, folding into corners and along the floorboards, bending reality softly. I sat on the edge of the chair. Each tick pressed against my skull, vibrating through my bones. I could smell the dust, taste the stillness, feel the cool air brushing my skin. The room seemed smaller, folding around me. I tried to count the ticks. 1, 2, 3, but the rhythm changed. Faster, slower, irregular. Time became meaningless, elastic, uncertain. The shadows pulsed with each vibration. They seemed aware, stretching and recoiling, patient, deliberate. I reached out, my fingertips brushing the wall. Cold, smooth, solid, yet the shadows moved as if mocking my touch. I closed my eyes. The ticking filled every corner of the room. It pressed into my ears, my chest, my throat. I could not tell if minutes or hours had passed. The air grew heavier. Every breath felt drawn, thick with dust and faint warmth. The clock continued its relentless pulse, and the shadows kept their careful, silent rhythm. I opened my eyes again. The room was unchanged, yet everything had shifted. The chair, the walls, the floor, all seemed slightly out of place, folded differently by the tick, the pulse, the shadows that move without light. I rose slowly. Each step echoed softly, yet the ticking pressed louder, unrelenting. The shadows trembled faintly, almost imperceptibly, then stilled. I could feel the weight of time folding around me, and I realized I would never know how long I had been here. I reached the door. The tick remained, filling the space behind me, pressing against a memory of my chest. I stepped through, and the room receded into silence, but the vibration stayed, a hum beneath my skin, echoing in the hollow spaces of my mind. Even after I left, I could feel it. Time stretched and folded around a memory of clock, and I wondered if I had ever truly left at all. The attic stairs groaned beneath my weight. The air was thick, warm, smelling of dust, wood, and old paper. Pale light spilled from a small window, tracing patterns across the floorboards. Then I heard it, rustling, 1,000 tiny feet skittering across boxes and beams, soft but insistent. I paused. The hum began shortly after, low and steady, vibrating to the floor, curling into my chest, pressing into my ears, almost like a lullaby. Boxes shifted slowly. Wood creaked, moved, as if breathing beneath the weight of unseen hands. Shadows twisted, stretching along the rafters, then folding back into corners. Every breath I drew tasted of dust and faint decay, yet carried a strange sweetness beneath it. I stepped forward cautiously. The hum grew slightly louder, folding around me, curling along my shoulders, tickling my skin with vibration, almost sentient. Each movement of the boxes was deliberate, patient, calculated. I reached out to a crate, cold, solid, yet it shifted again, edges scraping softly against the floor. I felt the air press against my neck, a gentle insistence, and I realized the attic itself was aware, alive in its quiet, deliberate way. I moved through the space, careful, slow. The rustling followed, persistent but shy, weaving behind walls and under beams. The hum remained constant, like the echo of some unseen heartbeat. I could smell the faint metallic tang of nails and old hinges, and the thick sweetness of rotting paper drifting from a forgotten trunk. I wanted to leave, but I lingered, drawn by the rhythm of movement. The subtle awareness that everything in the attic existed just beyond perception. The shadows danced, but never fully revealed themselves, and the hum pulsed with every soft footstep in the air around me. Finally, I stepped back toward the stairs. The rustling slowed, receded, folding into corners and shadows. The hum softened, settling into the stillness like a sigh. I paused, hand on the railing, sensing the attic watching me, even as it appeared perfectly still once I left. The air outside the attic was cooler, cleaner. The dust settled around me in faint eddies, but the memory of movement lingered in my chest, pressed into my shoulders, whispered along the back of my neck. Even in the silence, I could feel it, patient, waiting, aware. I descended the stairs slowly, each step cautious. The attic behind me was quiet, still, but I knew it had not stopped moving. Not truly, not entirely. The night was quiet. Streetlights hummed softly, casting pale circles on wet asphalt. The air smelled faintly of rain and cold concrete, damp and sharp. I noticed it first in the window, a faint silhouette, almost like smoke, lingering beyond the glass. It didn't move at first. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, it was closer, mimicking me from across the street, tilting its head when I tilted mine, folding its body in the same rhythm I did, but slightly delayed, slightly wrong. I shivered. The window pane pressed cool against my fingers. The faint hum of the street, distant and static, mixed with my own quickening breath. I stepped back, but it stayed, watching, mirroring, waiting. My reflection, it moved differently. My arms raised, and it hesitated, curling in ways my body could not. The glass held its own logic, bending the shadows, twisting the pale light. I felt the room shrink, folding around me, the air heavier, warmer, almost thick enough to taste. I turned away, trying to shake the feeling, but the sensation followed. Every shadow in the room seemed aligned now, subtle and deliberate, stretching like fingers toward me, reflecting something I couldn't fully see. I moved closer to the window again. The silhouette had shifted imperceptibly closer, folding into the street, into the faint fog that curled around the lamplight. It mimicked me still, copying, echoing, patient. And even in the soft glow of the room, I could feel it folded into the corner of my vision, lingering in the static of my own reflection. I pressed my hand to the glass. Cold, wet from condensation, smooth. The shadow didn't move away. It lingered behind the pane, patient, waiting, aware. Even my own breath on the glass seemed to carry it closer, as if it responded to me and not the other way around. I stepped back. The hum of the street, the smell of rain, the soft way of the night. It all pressed against me differently now. Every reflection in mirrors and windows across the house felt alive. Subtle distortions, small delays, hints of movement just behind my own. The silhouette in the street seemed to smile in the corner of my vision, though the air carried no sound, no warmth, only quiet, careful attention. Finally, I drew away from the window. The room felt normal, still silent, but the memory of the mirroring remained, folding into every shadow. Even when I moved to other rooms, the sensation lingered, persistent, patient, aware. I sat in the darkness, listening. The hum of the street became part of the room, the subtle shift of shadows folding around the corners. And I realized the window was not just glass. It was watching, reflecting, holding a presence that would follow me long after the night ended. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and moss. I found the garden tucked behind a crumbling stone wall, almost hidden beneath overgrown ivy and shadows. The flowers swayed softly as if breathing. Petals brushed my fingers, and each touch whispered back, faint and deliberate. Shadows bent toward me. Soft murmurs rose from the soil, subtle, almost melodic, folding into quiet night, pressing against my chest. I stepped further, careful. The grass felt damp beneath my shoes, cool and persistent. The hum of the night mixed with a low vibration from the earth itself, as if the soil itself exhaled with awareness. Each flower turned subtly toward me, folding their stems with gentle intent, and the petals seemed to sway in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat. The air smelled faintly of rain, of decay, of something older than memory. I crouched to touch the soil. The whispers deepened, curling around my hands, tiny murmurs brushing along my skin, delicate and precise. A faint static vibration hummed in the air, like a heartbeat stretched across the garden, slow and patient. I walked along the winding paths. Shadows stretched and leaned, curling around my ankles, following without moving, bending without form. Every step pressed against the earth, yet it felt as if the garden itself responded to my presence. I paused beneath a tree whose branches hung low. The whispers softened to a single, drawn-out hum. Leaves brushed against my face, wet, cool, scented of night and wood. The movement felt intentional, as though each leaf, each stem, knew I was there, watching, aware, folding reality slightly with its presence. Time blurred. I could not tell how long I had been wandering. The flowers still whispered, shadows still leaned, and the air remained heavy with anticipation, patient and unyielding. As dawn crept over the horizon, pale light spilling through the ivy, the garden quieted. The flowers straightened, the whispers vanished, and the shadows folded back into themselves. I stepped back. The faint traces of movement lingered in the soil. Petals slightly shifted. Leaves bent gently, and the hum of the night remained, echoing in memory. Even as the sun rose fully, the garden seemed empty, still, and yet I could feel it watching, waiting, patient, folded into the quiet corners of the morning. The street was empty. Night pressed against the edges of my vision, thick and heavy. The air smelled of frost and damp asphalt, sharp in the lungs. I walked slowly, careful. Footsteps echoed softly, almost too loud in the quiet. The faint hum of distant traffic vibrated through the soles of my shoes. Then it happened. Cold hands rested on my shoulder. I spun, breath quickening. Nothing, but the cold lingered. An icy impression pressed into my skin, as if the air itself had weight. Every nerve prickled. Every shadow felt closer, heavier, waiting. I continued walking, slow, deliberate. The streetlights flickered. Shadows stretched unnaturally, bending around corners, folding along walls. The air pressed against me, colder now, static, patient. Each step felt heavier than the last. The pavement beneath my feet seemed distant, softened, and I could sense movement just behind me, soft, unseen, deliberate. I dared to glance over my shoulder. Nothing, only the stretching darkness, curling against the street, folding into itself. Yet the memory of the icy grip remained sharp, insistent. The hum of the night grew, subtle, vibrating along my spine, like the air itself breathed behind me, matching the rhythm of my quickened pulse. The cold seemed to follow, patient and patient, unmoving yet never gone. I tried to focus on the street ahead. The mist curled around lampposts, tracing shapes that almost resembled forms, then vanished as I blinked. Every step echoed in my chest more than on the asphalt, folding time slightly, stretching the moment into suspense. I paused. The air shifted. I could almost hear the faintest exhale, not mine, not wind, but close, deliberate, folded into space behind me. I started walking again, faster now, but each step carried a memory of cold, the pressure of presence, and the sensation of being followed, silent, patient, unseen. Finally, I reached a turn where the street opened into emptiness. The cold lingered only in memory, folding into my skin, pressing into the shoulders I could no longer touch. The air was still, quiet, but I knew someone or something had been with me, patient, watching, walking just behind, folded into the night. The attic was quiet, heavy with dust and the smell of old wood. Moonlight seeped through a cracked window, pale and thin. I found the music box resting on a forgotten shelf, its surface cold, almost clammy under my fingers. I opened it. A tune drifted out, delicate, fragile, notes curling in the air like smoke. I didn't recognize it, and yet somehow it felt known. The melody shifted slightly, a subtle whisper weaving through the notes. Names I had never heard brushed my ears softly, like wind slipping through the cracks of the house. Shadows along the walls stirred. They twisted and stretched, leaning toward the corners of the room, then slipping back, tried to escape the light. I watched the wooden figures on the box spin. Their motion seemed to follow an invisible rhythm, shadows growing taller as the tune lingered, then shrinking when the music softened. A chill drifted across my neck. Breath caught in my chest, but the music did not stop. It hummed low, insistent, pressing against the quiet of the attic. The floorboards beneath me creaked softly, though I had not moved. A faint rustle brushed along the walls, folding into melody, stretching the tune into something alive. I leaned closer. The names whispered again, lingering just beyond understanding, curling around my thoughts, etching themselves into memory without invitation. Shadows leapt along the walls, bending and folding as though trying to flee the tune. They flickered at the edges of my vision, disappearing when I blinked, yet their movement left a trace, like a memory pressed into the darkness. The music shifted one last time. Notes slowed, stretching thin, breathing in the room with me, folding around my chest and shoulders. I felt weightless and heavy all at once, suspended between wonder and unease. When I closed the box, the shadows fell still. The room smelled faintly of cold wood and old paper, silent but not empty. The melody lingered, folded into my mind, names brushing the edges of my memory, soft as a whisper, persistent as a heartbeat. The air was damp. Night pressed down over the forest, heavy with the scent of wet leaves and earth. I walked where I thought I knew the ground, but the forest shifted, subtly, quietly. A path appeared, narrow, where none had been before. The trees leaned inward, forming arches that swallowed the moonlight. Shadows pooled beneath their roots, curling along the soil. Fog thickened around my ankles, clinging to boots, seeping into my sleeves, muffling the world beyond. Each step felt distant, softened, as though the earth itself swallowed sound. Then I heard it, soft laughter. It brushed the fog, curling into my ears, warm yet distant, familiar yet impossible. I stopped. The fog thickened further, turning the path into endless gray. I turned back, and nothing waited behind me, only darkness, folded, patient, silent. The trees seemed to lean closer. Their branches whispered against each other, rustling in a language I almost understood. The path narrowed beneath my feet, the fog pressing tighter, folding into the spaces between the trees. Footsteps echoed softly in the distance. I followed the sound with my gaze, but the mist swallowed it. The laughter returned, quieter this time, tangling with my breath, pressing against my chest. I tried to move faster, but the path seemed to stretch, unspooling beneath me, endless and still. Leaves brushed my arms, wet and cold, as if urging me onward, deeper into the fog. Shapes flickered at the edges of vision, tall, thin shadows, swaying with the rhythm of something unseen. Every blink made them vanish. Every exhale seemed to pull them closer, folding the forest around me, quiet, patient, waiting. I paused again. The laughter had stopped, but the memory lingered, folded into the fog, pressing it on my skin. The path stretched ahead, pale and silent, as if it had always been there, waiting for someone who did not yet belong. A cold breath grazed my neck. Not wind, not mine. The fog seemed to listen, pressing every sound, every heartbeat into the silence. I walked forward, step by slow step. The trees leaned closer, fog pressing tight, and the path seemed to fold beneath me. When I finally reached the edge, the path ended as quietly as it began. No footprints behind me, no trace of the laughter, only the memory of the fog and the feeling that the forest had been watching, folded around me, patient, silent, eternal. The night pressed against me, thick with fog. The air smelled damp, like earth left to rot. Footsteps on the frozen ground barely stirred the mist, but each step felt heavier than the last. I saw it then, a figure, standing perfectly still, far ahead. No features, no face, just a presence that seemed to pulse with the shadows. The trees leaned inward, folding the space around it, and the silence grew dense, pressing in my chest. I took a breath. It trembled in the cold air, and I felt the weight of the world tilt slightly, as if something unseen leaned closer. I stepped forward, and the figure did not move. It simply waited. The fog swirled around its form, curling in slow circles, brushing against the undergrowth. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, it was closer, not just closer in distance, but in something deeper, a sense that it had always been here, lurking behind my own heartbeat. The ground beneath me seemed softer, each leaf brushing my ankles like whispered fingers. The air grew heavier, like inhaling water instead of breath. I reached out, almost unconsciously, but the space between us was solid, impenetrable, and yet alive. Shadows stretched across the fog, elongating toward it, folding away from me. A faint hum vibrated through the air, barely perceptible, but deep in my chest. I felt it thrum. It was rhythm, heartbeat, breath, all at once, and it belonged to no one but the figure. I blinked again. Now it was inches away, too close, and still it did not move. No features, no shape I could name, only that impossible weight of being watched, of being known. The fog pressed tighter around us. I could feel its cold seep into my bones, but the figure remained untouched, still, patient, like a shadow that had learned to breathe. I wanted to run. My legs were heavy. The earth beneath my boots seemed to resist me. The air tasted thick, metallic, and each inhale carried the faint whisper of old forests, ancient and unmoving. I took another step. The figure did not flinch. It had been waiting. It would always be waiting. A soft rustle of leaves drifted across the path. I realized I had not noticed the silence before. It was not empty. It had been full of the weight of something patient. And now the fog carried it closer, folding me into the night. I stepped back, and the figure did not change. It was still there, a presence older than the trees, older than the fog. I could not see eyes. I could not see form. But I knew it could see me. A single breath passed between us, cold, silent, and it lingered long after I moved away. The forest seemed to exhale with it, and the mist swallowed everything in its path. When I finally turned, the figure remained, immovable, patient, waiting for the next step, or perhaps for me to realize I had never left at all. Then was quiet, the air thick with dust and something older. The walls smelled faintly of damp plaster and forgotten years. Footsteps on the worn floorboards echoed softly, each one stretching longer than it should. I noticed the wallpaper first in the corner of my eye, patterns that seemed ordinary, but the shapes shifted when I looked closer. A blink, a wink, The eyes. They followed me, not all at once. Some lingered behind folds of floral print. Others rested where the paper had bubbled from moisture. I stepped nearer. The hum of the heater vibrated through the floor, but the eyes were sharper than any sound. Cold, pale light spilled across the room, catching the mid-blink. I touched the wall. Rough, peeling, but alive in the memory of my skin. The wallpaper shivered under my fingertips. Or maybe it was my imagination. Either way, it watched. I turned, and the room felt smaller. The air pressed against my chest, and a whisper of mildew or old smoke drifted from the corners. Every shadow bent toward me, stretching across the faded carpet. A blink, another wink. They seemed to know me, not by name, not yet, but by something older, something I couldn't name. I sat in the chair, barely daring to breathe. The eyes followed the rise and fall of my chest. I felt the mood when I looked away, always shifting, always watching. The night stretched, silent but alive. The inn creaked softly, as if sighing in rhythm with the wallpaper. I imagined voices hiding behind the patterns, waiting for a pause in my breathing to speak. I left my hand resting on the wall. The paper did not resist. The eyes did not blink. They simply held me in place, in the weightless tension of something unseen. By morning, the sun softened the room. The walls were plain again. The floral patterns faded to ordinary shapes. No eyes remained. No winks. Yet I remember. Every gaze. Every blink. Every silent knowing. It stayed behind my eyelids, pressing softly into my thoughts. And in the quiet hours, I feel it still, following. The hallway was silent, the carpet worn and soft beneath my feet. I paused outside the door, smell of damp earth seeping through the cracks. Wet soil, faint but unmistakable. I opened it slowly. The room was perfect, everything in place. Sheets folded neatly, pillows fluffed as if waiting for someone who never came. The bed, it seemed to sigh when I drew near a low, soft exhale that brushed my skin. Air carried warmth and something darker, the faint hum of presence without a shape. I moved across the floorboards. My fingers brushed the edge of a chair. It shifted slightly. I looked away, and when I glanced back, the glass on the dresser had moved. Not far, just enough to remind me I was not alone. The light through the curtains was pale, stretching shadows across the floor. Each corner of the room held its own hush, a subtle tension like the breath of the walls themselves. I could feel it pressing against me, soft but unrelenting. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave, settling beneath my weight, but it seemed to lean slightly, as if curious, as if it had always known I would sit there. My eyes wandered. A book on the nightstand tilted. A vase shifted just a fraction. Every object held a rhythm of its own, moving only when I wasn't watching. And yet, I sensed it in my peripheral vision. A pulse, a presence. The scent of wet soil grew stronger, mingling with something older, something forgotten but familiar. I inhaled, and the room seemed to lean closer, wrapping around my chest like a soft, cold hand. I rose slowly. Footsteps muted on the floorboards, yet the silence was thick with attention. Every corner of the room followed me. Every shadow stretched toward my movement. I opened the door. Light spilled in from the hallway. The air outside smelled of wood and faint smoke. But I felt it still, the weight of the room watching, lingering beyond the threshold. I walked away. The inn carried on with its quiet creaks. Yet behind me, I knew the room waited. Perfectly neat, patient, ever aware. Even now, long after I left, I feel it. A gaze without eyes, a breath without lips. Silent, persistent. The riverbank was quiet. Fog curling low over the water. Air thick, damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and drifting reeds. I stepped closer. The surface shimmered pale, like the moon had sunk halfway into the river. Shapes moved beneath, blurring, folding into the dark. Each ripple whispered something I couldn't quite hear. I crouched, fingertips grazing the cold water. It hummed softly, a vibration that traveled through my bones. Not just a river's flow. Something else, something listening, something remembering. Names drifted on the mist, soft syllables that felt like echoes of loss, things I had forgotten, things I never had. I tried to focus. The words slipped through me like smoke. The fog thickened. It pressed against my skin, filled my ears with quiet murmurs. I imagined shapes moving just on the surface, pale faces, hands, shadows, then nothing. The river swallowed them back. A faint breeze brushed my neck, carrying the smell of damp moss and cold stones. The water's hum rose and fell like breathing, like soft sighs. I thought I saw movement, then blinked and it vanished. The river seemed alive, alive with memory, alive with something older, older than me, older than my thoughts. I tried to step back. Feet sank slightly into mud. The fog thickened around my ankles, wrapping, soft but persistent. The whispers lingered, faint and urgent. Every name felt personal, intimate, a connection I couldn't explain. I turned away, walked along the bank, leaving ripples behind me. But the river's voice followed, soft, patient, threading through my mind. Even in daylight, I can feel it, the hum under my skin, the whispered names drifting past my ears. I can't tell if they're memory or something else entirely. The river fades from view. Fog lifts slowly. But the quiet song stays with me. Lingering, persistent, the house stood alone. Windows dark, frames warped. The air around it smelled of damp wood and decay. I stepped onto the porch. Floorboards groaned beneath my weight. Though the house felt still, patient, waiting. A soft breeze carried the scent of rot and fallen leaves. Inside, the rooms were empty. Walls faded, paint peeling like skin. Shadows clung to corners, stretching unnaturally across the floorboards. I breathed slowly, feeling each inhale press against my chest. Footsteps echoed. Not mine. Soft, deliberate, moving just beyond vision. I paused. The air seemed thicker, humid, pressing against my skin. Nothing moved visibly, yet the echoes continued, pacing me. I walked down the hall. The wood creaked underfoot, but faint footfalls followed behind, soft, almost tentative. I tried to look back, but darkness swallowed the hallway. A door shifted slightly on its hinges. No wind, no touch, just a subtle slide of wood, a sigh that vibrated through the walls. I froze. The house seemed aware, waiting for me to notice. The air smelled of dust and something metallic, like forgotten keys or dried blood. A shadow moved across the floor, not in line with any window, not cast by any light. It crawled, stretching, curling into itself. I stopped in the center of a room. Nothing visible, yet I could feel it, a tension, presence. The silence became heavier, a weight in my ears, my chest, my skin. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I stayed. Step by step, the floor groaned beneath me. The faint hum of the house, like a pulse, like it breathed with me, not in rhythm with my own heartbeat, its own, ancient, slow. I touched nothing. I moved nothing. Yet objects seemed to shift subtly when I turned away. A chair leaned slightly. A curtain trembled, as though acknowledging I was there. In the corner, a shadow thickened, slow, curling toward the center. I blinked. It vanished. A soft sigh lingered, echoing through the empty walls. I walked toward the exit. Every step felt heavier, as if the house itself measured my weight. Footfalls continued behind me, soft, patient, never closing distance. Outside, the porch sagged under me. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of moss and wet wood. I glanced back. Windows dark, silent. The house waited. Even as I moved away, even as the fog swallowed the path behind me, the memory of eyes, or maybe attention, followed, settling into my chest. The house didn't leave. It never would. The forest waited. Fog hung low, thick and damp. Branches dripped with cold dew, and the scent of wet pine filled my nose. Each step sank slightly into soft earth. Mist curled around my ankles, then rose to my knees. It clung to my arms, my face, pressing cold against my skin. Shapes blurred in the gray. A tree leaned too far, then disappeared. A shadow stretched, dissolved, and reformed elsewhere. Breath mingled with fog, mind and something else indistinct. I moved forward, each step heavier, though the earth seemed to hold me softly. A rustling in the distance, quiet, almost a hum. It was not wind. It was a fog, alive, observing, patient. My hands reached through mist. I could feel it, wet, clinging, fluid. It wrapped around my fingers, my wrists. Cold seeped deeper, but not unkind. It felt like belonging. Shapes drifted past. Faces? Maybe. Or just the way shadow folded over shadow. I blinked. They were gone. Only silence remained. Thick, soft, all-encompassing. The forest smelled damp, green, and endless. A subtle hum vibrated in my chest, as if the trees themselves were breathing through me. I inhaled, and the fog inhaled too. Exhaled. It mirrored my rhythm. Time lost meaning. Each moment stretched, then vanished. I could not tell where I ended, where I began. I walked, or maybe floated. The mist carried me. It pressed into my skin, my hair, my clothes. It settled into my mind. Quiet, endless, patient. I tried to lift my hand. It passed through mist, through something that felt like resistance and warmth. I shivered, not from cold, from recognition. I whispered. No words formed. The fog answered anyway, folded me into itself. I could feel my edges soften, my thoughts slowing, my skin fading into the gray. A bird cawed somewhere. A branch snapped, but the fog swallowed it. All sound, all shape, all distance melted into gray. I stopped, or maybe I did not. Movement lost meaning. The fog pressed closer, and I realized I had become part of it. Cold seeped into my bones. But warmth followed, gentle, as if the forest had held me all along. I breathed, and the mist breathed back. I turned back. No path, no trees, no self, only fog. And in that gray silence, I felt complete, not alone, not lost, just part of the endless, quiet forest, a whisper folded into the mist.